Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Keys to the Success of the Best. My name is Nathan Stelter. I'm the Vice President here at the Stelter Company, and happy to be here today to introduce our presenter, Eddie Thompson. Before I do, I'd like to say a few words about our upcoming webinar series for 2019. As many of you know, as an industry leader in planned giving marketing, Stelter is committed to providing innovative solutions and education for the industry. We're very happy to always host these webinars complimentary, as well as a whole slate of webinars throughout the year. Today's webinar is actually the first of our 2019 curriculum. We do have a bevy of topics and speakers on our stelter.com website. Some of that includes presenters like Paul Casperson from University of Florida, who will be sharing insight into unique planned giving strategies for boomers. Michael Degenhart from Penn State University sharing tips for integrating planned giving into campaigns, and James Preston, who's actually going to share a case study of his efforts in planned giving and ROI at the University of Missouri. So you can register for those whenever you'd like at our website at stelter.com/webinars. We'll be sending those invites straight to your inbox as those webinars draw closer. Now back to today's presentation, Keys to the Success of the Best with Eddie Thompson. Many of you who are on the call may have had the pleasure of already meeting Eddie or hearing him speak. Eddie is actually the founder and CEO of Thompson Associates, which provides leadership and direction to over 35 seasonable charitable estate planners with an inspiring sense of generosity, integrity, and passion for helping others. By creating a unique value-based model at Thompson Associates, Eddie and his team have established for over 23 years a way for people to dedicate the necessary time to consider important life decisions and to engage in thoughtful discussion that leads to optimal results for all. Eddie himself has planned thousands of estates, which generated billions of dollars for charity during his 30-plus years working with nonprofits. He speaks to organizations from coast to coast, actually already having been to 11 states this year and heading out again tonight on successful fundraising techniques, nonprofit management, and charitable estate planning, and has garnered many honors during his distinguished career. As you can see on the screen, Eddie serves as chair of the Charitable Estate Planning Institute, a 501c3 public charity offering top-level education on charitable estate planning for development staff, gift planning officers, and advisors. And Eddie and a group of Thompson Associates colleagues formed the Institute in 2012. He's also a fellow in charitable estate planning awarded by the Institute. Eddie obtained his doctorate of education and higher education administration from Vanderbilt University, and his doctoral dissertation was on successful fundraising methods. I have a feeling some of that will be applied to our talk today. Native of Florida, Eddie and his wife Cheryl have been married for more than 40 years and have made Nashville their home. They have 2 sons and 4 dogs. I'd like to thank Eddie Thompson for being our guest today, and I will hand it over to him.
Thanks, Nathan. Glad to be with everybody today. I hope that you'll find this presentation helpful today as we move forward talking about the most successful techniques in fundraising. I don't know if that's me or, there we go. Oh, there we go. So today we're going to talk about what are the most successful techniques in fundraising. And I learned from my dissertation, I traveled the country looking at 13 best universities in the country and contrasted them to 13 average. And what I was trying to find out, why were the successful shops so incredibly successful? What did they do? What did they know? What methods or techniques were they using that others that were average were not using? It's a fascinating study. But the best part about it is I still use it every day. So I asked the question, why are some nonprofits more successful than others? Is it simply mission-driven, or is it strategies and techniques that are different? Just what exactly is happening in that process? So what are their secrets to success? Oh, let's see. If I go to the next slide, I'm sorry for that. I had a little glitch here. So the key to this is understanding why these shops have been so incredibly successful. And I want to begin by suggesting that really successful fundraising techniques is like a mosaic. You have various pieces that have to be put together. They don't need to overlap, but they do need to touch, making sure there's no gaps. So the best way to think about the great organizations is they've assembled these pieces, these small pieces that may seem insignificant, into something that's just absolutely tremendous. As we realize that the mosaic is held together by a foundational frame. And these are essential. These are just starts that everybody understands. You got to have excellent leadership, an appealing mission, dedicated staff and high visibility in the community. Now, all of those are essential, but the frame that holds the mosaic together is the key to this. Now, so the frame is not the picture. So let's look at the 16 characteristics of the most successful organizations. And here's what you're going to find. The most shocking thing about what I'm going to present today is nothing shocking. These are things that we all know, we all understand, and we may be good at 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 at these, but the key is try to improve every single one of these to be even more successful in the future. Now, number 1, no shock, no surprises. These organizations focus on having donor conversations, and the reality is they listen more than they talk. They talk about how the organization changes lives and how dollars are tools, techniques to making a difference in the lives of people who have real serious needs. The conversations set the context for giving, and the request is made as part of the conversation. It's an important part, but it's still a part. You know, the one thing that we hear from donors over and over and over again is that nonprofits only come to see me or contact me when they want a gift. Donors are looking for relationships, which leads us to the second point. The more successful organizations really spend time and focus on building relationships. Now, we all know that. The problem is for many of us is that we have too many hats to wear. We have too many responsibilities. We have very little time left to go out and actually sit down with donors and have conversations. But here's what we know. Great relationships lead to very large gifts. It's almost impossible, unless it's a surprise bequest, that you'll get a large gift without having a relationship with a donor. Donors are more than simply names on a donor list. And it's really important that they feel like they relate to the organization. Another surprise, which is not actually a surprise, they ask for more gifts. It is amazing to realize how many individuals who are engaged in fundraising spend a tremendous amount of time with donors and never ask for the gift. Now, we're asking people to be involved in something that's great, something that's noble. And so it shouldn't shock us that people want to be involved in something worthwhile and may be energized to do so, and we never get around to asking them. So we want to ask people with whom we have a relationship after having established some deep and important conversations. But we also got to realize that we have to observe giving patterns. There are reasons why people give certain types of assets. There are reasons why they give certain times of the year. And we're really wise to get to know these individuals and find out what's behind their giving pattern. The more we understand their patterns, the more successful we are in raising gifts, which shows that we got to spend some time analyzing our donor records. Now, fifth, and this is really important, and it's subtle, but it is really important. We need to know why and what people are giving. So questions like, why are they given to us? Why does a donor choose your charity over other charities? And again, this is best discovered by having a conversation. What's their motivation? We want to know why. We want to know what the gift is about. And if the more we understand that organization's donor, the better we will be at raising gifts. The other thing I would suggest is that they really have meaningful visitation reports. Now, I know we don't like filling those out, but all of us have followed someone at an organization who left us very little information. These records are important to build a case and coming to really fully understand what the donor is intending to do with their giving. Donor reports should be at least meaningful, intentional, and reveal insights to the donor, small nuances that guide future discussions. They can be bullet points, they can be narratives, but it's really important that we look at what people are telling us with those visitation reports. I would also ask that we need to thank donors for a commitment. I spent several years ago working with 25 individuals or couples that had made at least $1 million outright gift to a charity. I spent a lot of time with those individuals trying to find out why. One of the things that shocked me is how seldom we really thank donors for what they're doing. Now, most of us do, but sometimes they make a gift and then we move on. But these individuals, as we'll see here in just a minute, are not simply making gifts, they're making investments. So we promise when someone makes a gift, we're going to thank them for that gift, but we're also going to promise something. We're going to promise to use that gift wisely and efficiently. We know that 76% of donors fear that nonprofits do not know how to manage the money they give them. Now let's just think about that for a second. What is the likelihood they're going to give us a big gift if they don't feel like we can manage that gift wisely? So we make a promise, one person to another. We promise that the money you give us will be used thoughtfully, wisely, and efficiently. It's a promise. This promise is part of our expression of appreciation for the gift. It's a crucial thank you for sharing their assets and to state that we will use it just as they intended. So we thank them with a comment. We thank them for their gift. Now, number 8, we want to manage our time with what we refer to as DBDs, done by dates. You know, you find people who are highly successful, and you've read books on this, I'm sure as well. They set deadlines, they set goals, they set objectives, and they measure their success by the achievement of those done by dates. It increases efficiency. I don't know how often you have used this, but I have found it to be compelling and really important. Staying on top of your responsibilities, making big tasks, small tasks, and achieving them one by one, day by day to be more successful. Having timelines and goals help us establish great records to achieve greater than we ever thought possible. Now, the truth is, by setting these dates and working backwards, we're more efficient. I learned in graduate school, a professor told me, when you get assignments, start on it immediately. You know what? He was absolutely right. I found it very helpful to start, work on it every single day, a little bit at a time, and then I finished early, and it gave me a chance to review my work. It's a great idea to establish done by dates to make sure that you stay on schedule. Small pieces, small decisions, small steps lead to great success. So we want to manage our time by done by dates. And the other thing I've noticed over the years, the really great organizations, it did not happen by accident. They have a fundraising strategic plan. They know exactly what they're going to do, and they know who's going to go with them, what's needed, what things need to be assembled, what people need to be assembled, what kind of budgeting is necessary. They have not just an institutional strategic plan. They have a fundraising strategic plan. Individuals have clear goals and challenges which need to be achieved all along the way. Individuals need to have a clearly defined job description that complements each other on the team. I was just on a call about an hour and a half ago with an organization that it just amazed me, the depth at which they spent time looking at what everybody's responsibility was to make sure that everybody was complementing everyone else. It is an amazing team. I was just absolutely blown away. They had clearly defined job descriptions. Everybody knew their responsibility, but they went one step further in that they saw themselves as a team. And I've noticed over the years, these organizations that are just exceptional, they're fanatic about being disciplined. They're neurotic about the passion of excellence. They hire successful people who have a proven track record, who has achieved success in the past. They hire team players who are willing to learn and to change and to improve. And they let hires know right up front that we're not going to keep individuals who are not pursuing personal excellence at every single thing they do. They have a job to do, and they perform it at the highest level. These individuals understand the value of a systematic approach. Now, you think about that for a second. It's really hard to achieve great success if you don't have a plan where you're going to go. So a systematic approach is really important. But I would add to that this next line, which is kind of the naughty topic for a lot of us, the need for accountability. Now, you know, metrics can cause a lot of anxiety if they're misused. But the truth is metrics ought to really help us to be accountable. We have assigned jobs, we have expectations placed upon us, and we know that in order to be successful, everyone needs to work as part of a team, holding each other accountable. Now, not in the spirit of belittling or condemning or being harsh. That doesn't help anyone. But to help us individually and collectively be held accountable. Each person's success depends on others completing their task and on time. So holding each other accountable are small steps on a long path which ends in great results. Holding everyone accountable for activities is not just about raising dollars. It's far more than that. It's making sure that our activities lead to greater gifts. Now, just to be fair-minded, we need to hold each other accountable. Now, I would also suggest that one of the mistakes that often managers make in the fundraising office is they only evaluate people based upon how much money was raised. And that gives me pain, because the reality is that's the one thing we can't control. I cannot control what a donor gives to our organization. I can only measure and hold myself accountable for my activities. So accountability is important, but it has to be realistic. It has to be thoughtfully done, but it's so valuable when done properly. The other thing I would add is that we need to communicate. This is where it may sound like I'm providing a commercial for Stelter. It's not my intent or purpose, but it is true. Communicating to our donors, informing our donors, whether it's in major gifts, annual gifts, but especially in planned gifts, communications are extremely important. I'm amazed at how many organizations start something like Stelter and their great work. They'll keep it 2 or 3 years and they cease to see any kind of results. They see nothing of great value coming through the door, so they quit. And it just amazes me, because we know there's 3 types of donors. You have your habitual donor, which gives annually. It's about 70% of your donor base. They give out a habit. The second group of donors are emotional donors, is about 23% of your donor base. And they give because something struck their heart. They feel something that's emotional. But then there's that 7%, which are strategic donors. They tend to be wealthy. They tend to be cautious. They tend to be very deliberate. They do not make gifts. They make investments. And just like any other investment, they expect a return on investment. But here's the key about these individuals. They read everything, just like they do with their investments. They're thoughtful, they're deliberate, and it takes time. There's nothing quick about this. They need time to disseminate information, to gather data, to think about it. And that anything you send them, they're going to read. So don't just send it to them for a while. Continue that education. And I know that, again, sounds like a commercial. That's not the intent. It's just really one of the keys to success. Sometimes our communications need to be non-solicitation. Maybe 3 times a year you send a letter saying, here's what's happened in the organization. Make sure you do that thoughtfully. But also you need to have times where you call donors and say, just let me bring you up to date on what's taking place in our organization. It's really important that we realize that these are individuals, and they're thoughtful, they're deliberate, and they make decisions based upon relationships. And sometimes they feel like the only time we call them is when we're asking for a gift. I asked this one gentleman of the 25 families I met with, when you get a call from a nonprofit, what's the first emotion you feel? He said fear and anxiety, because I feel like the only time they call me is when they ask for a gift. I feel like I have a target on my chest. And sometimes I feel like an ATM machine. Well, that takes us back to the only time we call them is when we ask for a gift. We need to be more thoughtful, much more deliberate than that. Making these personal visits is so incredibly important. We communicate by letter, by phone, but most importantly in person, but keep that educational material in front of them. It is so incredibly important. One of the most important things you can do is keep your name in front of that organization or that individual on an ongoing basis. So that was number 11. Number 12, be donor-centered. I learned my lesson the hard way, and I'm embarrassed to tell you this story. It's very early on in my career. I called on a gentleman here in Nashville where I live, and he was a very generous donor. He gave us a tremendous amount of money over a long period of time. And I went and sat down with him one day, and I had prepared this presentation that had 80 pages. Can you believe that? I had a proposal that was 80 pages, and I was flipping through it, and I was so excited. And I looked over, and he was leaning back on the couch. And I said, do you have a question? And he said, no. And he said, Eddie, the only thing you care about is my money. And it struck me to the core. He was right. And I looked at him and I told him, I will never, ever do this again to you or anybody else. I remember getting on the elevator, going downstairs and getting in my little blue Sunbird and pulling around the corner and taking out a napkin. I can still see this in my hands today. Still today, I took a napkin and a blue ink pen and I wrote on that these words, donor-centered. And I said to myself, no matter the personal consequences, I will never, ever betray this. So it needs to be a personal goal, and to understand that we need to treat donors first. They have a lot of things to think about. Now, we have job responsibilities, but they've got a lot of other responsibilities, a lot of things to think about. We don't know their financial situation. We need to put them first, and I promise you, as soon as we do that, we'll raise more money. People give to friends. They give to people they like. This is not fundraising by extraction. It's really thoughtful, and being donor-centered is a really important key to being successful. You could walk into these really successful shops, go to their meetings, and you would hear them talk about donors, not in terms of what they can give, but their quality of life, the kind of people they were. And it's really difficult to raise a lot of money if you feel pressure to raise a lot of money. But it is incredibly exciting. It is incredibly exciting to see a donor make a gift that brings tears to their eyes. And then they thank you for receiving this gift. It is amazing that organizations that put their donors' needs ahead of the organizational needs are the most successful in the country. I think we ought to get pause and think about that. And I wish I could have all the bosses at your organizations and board members, I wish I could sit down with them and say the best approach is to put the donor first. Let them choose what to give and how much. All you got to do is dream big dreams with them. Let them know how those gifts can change people's lives. It is so exciting when that takes place. Number 13, and this is one of the single biggest issues we see, and I have entitled it here, capacity, capacity, capacity. I'm amazed at how many hats the average fundraiser has to wear, how many meetings they have to attend, all the things that they are required to do that have almost nothing to do with raising dollars. And yet, guess what they're held accountable for? Raising dollars. So here's what I would suggest. How many donors and prospects would benefit from a meaningful conversation? How many donors or prospects who support your organization would give more if they had a meaningful conversation? And then the other question I would ask is, how many fundraisers do you have on staff? One of the biggest things we have found, I have two companies. One is Thompson Associates and the other is Gift Clarity. And Gift Clarity, we do a strategic plan for organizations, and we look at capacity. And the old rule, 80% of the money is given by 20% of the people, has not been what we've discovered, and now well over 100 analysis. We find the average organization, 80% of the money comes from 5.6% of the people. And we also find that the average major gift officer spends about 10 to 11% of their time in conversations with donors. So that poses two questions for me. What would happen if we had time to get out and see the other donors? So if a major gift officer has 175 in their portfolio, but they only spend 10 to 12% of their time out seeing donors, who are they missing? And then the other question is, who's calling on the other 95% of our donors who are giving? Do you think individuals would give more if they were visited? That's a really important question. So we find that often, again, the fundraisers have too many hats they're wearing, too many responsibilities that are underrelated to direct giving, and they feel this pressure. Now they have a limited amount of time, and they've got to see the same people over and over again. It's just so frustrating. So if you think about this, none of the other characteristics really matter if we do not have a large enough staff. The other thing we find is that typically most officers, development officers, do not have enough support staff. Now they may have someone who records gifts, someone who sends out letters, but every officer needs at least 1/3 time FTE supporting their work. And the other thing I would add is that one of the ways to look at capacity is how much time, what's the FTE to spend time with donors? What's your full-time equivalent with donors? Capacity is so important. It's the single most neglected area of everything we see. We need more people. And we need pro formas to show chief financial officers and board members and CEOs that adding staff raises more money. 14, this is important, is balance. What is the balance among your organization's efforts in annual giving, major giving, and capital campaigns? You tend to see organizations that specialize in one or the other. Very seldom do we find an organization that's focused purely on planned giving. However, I have seen that. Organizations' only fundraising effort is in planned giving. But we have seen a trend in recent years where capital campaigns have taken the lead. And I would suggest before you can really have a successful capital campaign, or at least dream really big dreams, you need to have a strong annual, major, and planned giving program. And again, these donors that tend to be strategic donors, they love to read. They also tend to be individuals who give small amounts during their life, but their largest gift is their last gift out of their estate. The other thing I would add is that this concept of balance, of strength, is that most organizations either have a large annual gift staff or a large major gift staff. Seldom have those two been balanced. So it's really important as we go forward that we think about keeping that unrestricted annual gift separate from a capital campaign gift and use capital campaign gifts as capital efforts. And I would add to that it's really important if you have a capital campaign that you have a capital campaign component that includes planned gifts to endow the capital efforts. Really important approach that you'll see in the most successful shops. Now, number 15, solicitation. You know, solicitation is one of these areas that kind of gives us pause. And I gave a speech about 3 years ago, or 4 years ago now, to 2,700 fundraisers who were assembled out in California. They're from all over the world, really, not just the United States. And in my presentation, I asked how many had been taught and trained to solicit. Out of the 2,700, 3 raised their hands. Now, I want you to think about this. How much time have you spent in working on your solicitation? And have you had training? You know, it is a natural result of a conversation. A good solicitation really doesn't add pressure, and you're asking someone to join you in something that's noble, something that's worthwhile, something that has real value. And I think about this, and I think about how important that solicitation is. And we need to really focus our attention and our energies on making sure that solicitation is not just smooth and not just emotional, but it's revealing about who we are as individuals and organizations. The key to solicitation is making sure that you have already connected with the heart of that individual. They know you, they believe in you, and they trust you. And you are the conduit through which they give to that organization. They've got to trust you, not just like you. They've got to trust you. They've got to respect you. And they've got to believe in what you're doing enough in your personal life and in your business choices that they want to give and make a difference in the life of someone else. Number 16, I think the most important lesson I learned in my dissertation, without a doubt, was this next slide. I was sitting with a gentleman who was Pomona College, and if you've been around a long time, you remember the Pomona plan back in the late 70s, early 80s, and they raised a staggering amount of money. I was sitting down with him at a McDonald's across from campus, and I said, "What's the one secret you know that no one else knows?" He took out a napkin and he drew an oval. And in the oval, he wrote 2 initials, D.I. He started drawing all these arrows towards that oval. And he said, "Eddie, every nonprofit is asking donors to make gifts out of discretionary income. Write us a check." And he said that's about 4.5% of the average person's budget. I don't know if that figure still stands today, but that's what he said then. And he said, "You're competing," started poking at all these arrows. He said, "You're competing with all other charities, eating out at Friday night, going to movies, giving to other organizations. You're competing with such a small percent of money." Then he drew a rectangle, and in the rectangle, he drew these 2 initials, N.W. He said, "Eddie, the smart organizations ask for gifts of net worth." Now, in recent years, I've learned in what we call today blended gifts, our donors have been leading us with blended gifts forever, and that we can ask for both to show them a plan that really does make sense, where they give that annual gift, and it may be fairly small, but they set a goal, they set a pledge going out in the future, And whatever has not been made during their lifetime, an inter vivos gift, they would give from their estate. You know, I think of all the lessons I've learned, I really believe that is the most important. Realizing that gifts of net worth can be combined with gifts of discretionary income and what we call blended gifts today, and you can change an institution's future. You can make a difference in the way that organization can serve the needs of others for a long period of time, if not in perpetuity. Finding that one or two or three individuals a year that are willing to combine the gifts of discretionary income with gifts of net worth. And first of all, it is just amazing to be involved in something like that, to see the joy in their eyes and the expression. And it reminds me of this individual I worked with years ago who, after they had made the gift, wrote me a thank you note that they hand delivered with a coconut cream pie. And they were thrilled with this gift. Now, did that donor feel something very special in their heart? Absolutely. Did it help the not-for-profit? Oh, yes. It changed their course, their future. But I tell you what, it shaped me too, to realize there's real joy in giving. And when you can combine a gift of discretionary income and gifts of net worth, it can really make a difference. Now, I want to try to give you a few other items that are not on this presentation that I find really important, that are really supplemented in what we've been saying before. And number one is we need to set goals every single year for the number of visits and conversations we have with donors. Set a goal. Write it down. Focus on it every single day. And set a dollar goal and a stretch goal for each donor in your portfolio. And then set out with a plan, a strategy. Small steps lead to great success. But you've got to constantly evaluate your activities. Where are you going? What are you doing next? Now, when all of this is said and done, here's the point. This is the reason why I love working with people in philanthropy. This is really key. We have a difference. We can really make a difference in the lives of people who desperately need us to excel today. We may never know them, and it may be 20 or 30 years down the road, but our efforts today can make a difference in the life of someone we never meet. How exciting is that? How fun is that to know that you personally are going to make a difference? You know what that requires of us? It requires of us excellence, to do what we do at the very highest level, to achieve excellence, not for ourselves and not so we can be recognized, but we achieve excellence to make a difference in the lives of people who desperately need us. Wow, what a great pleasure is that. What a great joy to make a difference, to truly make a difference. Is an amazing calling. When you think about what we do every single day and realize there are people that desperately need us to excel, boy, that's why we drive done by dates. That's why we want those conversations. That's why we want to make a difference, because we are people who live in passion in changing the lives of others. And in doing so, it changes us too. What a great industry. I love people who are involved in philanthropy. I appreciate what they do every single day. I appreciate those who are struggling, trying to get better, those who want to achieve and haven't yet, but have that drive, all those characteristics. So I summarize what I've learned in 42 years of doing this, seeing hundreds and thousands of nonprofits. Here's what I've discovered. Nothing is more important than your heart. Nothing. And if we're not willing to give our very best effort, there's nothing wrong with us going to do something else. But if we're going to keep those chairs where we're making a difference in nonprofits, we're going to be engaged in nonprofits, it should demand of us individually and also collectively the highest standard of excellence. You find those great shops, you find the exceptional shops, you walk into their offices, you go to their meetings, and you sense it. You feel it. It's deep down inside. These are people who are focused like laser beams. They know exactly what they're in. They got a strategic plan. They have a staging opportunity in the future. They contact their donors on a regular basis. They build those relationships. They add staff as they need them, but they add staff who have a passion for excellence, who have already been successful. What a great career. What a great thing to do. So really, when you stop and think about it, there are more than 16 characteristics or keys to success, but the most important one is your heart. Secondly is understanding how people give. And third, living this, doing it because we are making a difference. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this today, Nathan. I appreciate what your company does, and I hope that we really can be helpful in making each and every person who are attending a better organization and a better professional. Let me pause and see if there are questions.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. I appreciate it so much. What a great talk and so many great things to share. I know, a lot of folks were sending in some questions here, and we're definitely going to get to those. But I did want to thank you personally for doing this, because there's some great things that a lot of us need to be thoughtful of, and there's some questions I think some people are curious on how can we inform leadership, how can we get them to get buy-in. But I'm going to hand it over to Jen. She's going to tackle a couple of these questions, and then I'll bring a couple as well.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, we do have some questions that came in, and I also want to encourage the 300 of you that are still on the webinar with us. Thanks for joining us. We have some time here at the end. If you'd like to have a conversation with Eddie, go ahead and send your questions in, and we'll get to those. So the first question that came in, I think it was earlier in the presentation when you were talking about the importance of communication, consistent communication with your donors. And you were talking about there's 3 types of donors, the donor that gives out of habit, and you also said there's the donor that gives to invest.
Okay.
Avni is, right, and Avni is wondering, he or she missed the middle type of donor that you were talking about, and if you have percentage breakdowns for those donors, if you could talk about that just a little more.
Sure. There are 3 types of donors. 70% give based on habit. They give the same time each year, typically December. They may have given the same amount for the last 10, 15, 20 years. The big challenge with that group is to get them to upgrade their giving, to give more. Then 23% give based on emotion. They hear something, they read something, they experience something, and they're driven by their heart to give. Now, those gifts tend to be larger, but they tend to be less frequent. So the challenge with that group is to keep them engaged and get them giving more more gifts more frequently. The third group is the one that I think we have the greatest potential that we ignore, and that's 7% of your donors are strategic donors. They are thoughtful, they're deliberate, they're cautious, they calculate, they read everything. They are a great list to receive ongoing information about planned gifts. They tend to be wealthy. They do not make gifts, they make investments. They look for return on investment. And again, the return's not financial, but they look what organization is really making a difference. So 70% give based on habit, 23% give based on emotion, and then 7% are strategic donors. Now, I want to add a couple of things with that. There's 2 types of wealth accumulators. There's the terminal accumulator of wealth. They're the individual who they build wealth for themselves. They spend money on themselves, and they do make gifts, but they like being seen. The other type of wealth accumulator, and they're a smaller percent, obviously, but they're the instrumental accumulator of wealth. And getting wealthy, being successful was not so much a part of their vision as was trying to achieve something, trying to build something. They tend to live in houses longer than the average person, drive cars longer than the average person, and they tend to be very wealthy. So if you can find that strategic donor who is also an instrumental accumulator of wealth, you can really generate some high dollar gifts. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that was terrific, and we're getting a lot of questions here, so I appreciate everybody staying on with us here. A couple of them, and actually one quick kudo. We've received a virtual hug for you, Eddie, from Kimberly West, thanking you for reminding her of why she does what she does. Heart is number one. So I wanted to share that. Kind of lump some of these together. Both Judy and Audrey had questions around and I think some of this is probably part of the impetus for what I really love that you guys are working on now with the Gift Clarity platform. But some of the questions that popped up are how many donors or prospects make up an ideal portfolio, or what is the right number of visits each development officer should have on an annual basis, and would that be unique visits? So those are some of the more tactical questions.
Sure. The answer to that question is like a good lawyer, it depends. Because it depends on what percent of your time can you actually spend with donors. That's where we start. Before we ever set a specific number of donors in your portfolio, we want to know what percent of your time can you actually give in seeing donors. We see the average of somewhere 10 to 12%. The really good shops, the really good shops are 75% of their time or higher. The highest I think we've seen is about 85. So 75 to 80%. 5% of their time is actually spent with donors. And if you could do that, if you could do 75%, you could really manage well 175, give or take, donors. But you got to have an agenda. You got to have an agenda of how many visits. You need to have an agenda of how many telephone calls, how many letters, how many times are they going to receive a mailing from you. But for a major gift officer who are spending 75 to 85% of their time, we would say 175. Some would go a little bit higher, some would be less. Annual gift officer, we've seen anywhere from 350 to 480, depending on how many times you want to see those donors a year. Annual gift officers tend to see donors only once, so that'd be 10 visits for 48 weeks. Of course, all that depends on if you have to travel or not. But those are pretty basic standards, and it's what we see as being the highest functioning organizations doing.
Thanks, Eddie. We also have another thank you from Richard Olson. He says he used to work with Gary Hargroves, and that he knows why that Gary always spoke so highly of you. And he thanks you for this talk. So that's wonderful. And then we have a question from Melissa. Melissa wants to know, kind of in line with what you were just talking about, what would you say to, or what advice would you give to the fundraiser that always seems to be busy with other activities and responsibilities versus getting out on the road and meeting with the donors?
Okay. I'm a pretty candid person. I would tell them I'm going to miss them. I expect, when I engage someone to work for me, I let them know right up front what I expect, that I expect them to pursue excellence at the same pace everybody else is. And what tends to happen, Jen, is that we wait until it becomes a big crisis before we deal with it. And we'd be a lot wiser if we could have a system where we could see every single day what is being accomplished by every single officer. Are they staying concurrent with their goals? And that's when you address it. But if they I remember we were in a meeting like 2 or 3 years ago, we're sitting around the table, and this one very successful officer had been with them 30 plus years. When they were told that they would be held accountable, he looked at his boss and said, "You're not holding me accountable." Well, I don't think that spirit's really positive. But I would say that I would lay out in front of them what I expect and what they need to do, because I am driven by the mission. I am trying to change lives. And if someone's getting paid, we have an ethical obligation to make sure that money given by donors is spent wisely. To me, it's about ethics. It's about standards. And I would try to help them, try to work with them. But ultimately, if they're not willing to get out there and see the donors and produce, I just couldn't keep them. I know that sounds harsh.
No, but hey, it's fair. I get it. And again, part of the reason I really like what you guys are doing with Gift Clarity, just for that accountability. And we had another question actually on accountability from AJ. Again, as you were talking about that and how everyone's success depends on others. was kind of curious, and this is a question, I know we're seeing more and more as the shops are trying to work more cohesively together, annual, planned, major, and not, in the silos that they've traditionally been. But have you seen any commonalities within those successful organizations you researched in terms of how they award or share fundraising credit for their development officers? Have you seen anything?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And yes, the answer is yes. It kind of depends on the staffing, how it's set up. But there's the ideal approach would be to have an ever-growing staff. Because again, we've got, for the average organization, 95% of their donors will never be visited with current staff. So what we want to do is grow that staff where we start seeing a larger chunk every single year, so that 95% begins to decrease. And so you tend to bring in an annual gift officer who you want to hire really well and move them up to major gift. When you get them up to major gift, there's 3 ways. Well, let me back up. A trend that we're seeing that I think is a really frightening trend for me is you're seeing fewer and fewer people who are trained in plan giving. And so we're almost afraid to, if we're not trained in that area, to delve into it. Now, again, we can rely on Stelter or other organizations to educate donors, but sooner or later, you got to know something about it. I think it's really wise when you have maybe 3 major gift officers that you hire a person who has some expertise in plan giving, either to have one of 3 ways, either to have their own donor list or to be a resource person and have a donor list of maybe 35. Maybe the first one, they have a donor list of 75. Second would be a resource person for the other 3 officers and have maybe 30, 35 of their own clients. And then secondly, as they get more and more successful in major gifts and annual gifts, maybe that plan giving person, all they do is resource. It just kind of depends. But the sharing, I think if we could ever get to the point, and the great organizations do this without exception, they do not care about who gets the credit. They are so driven-minded, and they're so team-oriented. They are all in this together. So your success is my success. And there's not this division where there's play against one for another. That's hard to do because we've got a lot of personalities. But if we're really going to be good at this, I think that's a requirement. Did that answer that?
Yeah, I think that's great. We are going to move on to kind of another topic. Mark is wondering if you have tips on ways to persuade your leadership to invest more money in your fundraising infrastructure, such as hiring more fundraisers, paying for some other marketing tactics that they haven't done in the past, digital, and then also, cultivation efforts. How do you persuade your leadership?
Mm-hmm. Well, most of our leadership are numbers people. They're either CEOs or there's CFOs or COOs, and most of them been trained in accounting. So they love pro formas, and I have found that is the single most important tool if you're trying to convince for a deeper investment. So a pro forma shows in a financial way what will be achieved financially by an investment. It's more than just a return on investment concept. It's where you say, if we hire this person and we get a 10% increase, and we move up 10% of our donors into the next category, we'll generate this, and then you do that out for 5 years. So you, if someone would like, if they would like a sample of a pro forma, I'll get them one. I don't know how the best way to do that. It's really a pretty simple chart, but it's really important if you're going to talk to CFOs and CEOs and chief operating officers. You're going to talk in terms of hiring staff. We often come in and say we need more staff, and they go, how much more money we're going to raise? Well, we don't know. So the way to do that is to set goals for maybe a 5-year period, and then when you get to a certain point, let's say you're netting $100,000 per officer, just as example, and in 4 years or 5 years you want them to be at $250,000 net. Then you would draw a line maybe at $190,000, $290,000. When you reach that point, you would hire another staff person. The other thing so if you would like to see a pro forma, I don't know the best way to do that, Nathan and Jen, but I'd be happy to get one to you all or whatever you think
Yeah,
is best.
absolutely. We had a couple people already write in and say they would love one. So
Okay.
yeah, you can send that to me and I will put that up on our website along with the recording and the slides from today so everyone can go ahead and download that along with the slides. So that'll work perfectly.
The other thing I would add about that is that one of the best tools I've used, it's pretty simple, that really works well, at least has for me in the past, is I sit down with a CEO or CFO and I said, if you would give me $5 and I would give you $20, how often would you do that? Of course, their answer is going to be as many times as you would. And I'd say if you were to give me $40 and I would give you $100, how many times would you do that? Well, as many times as you would like. And so my question would then become, you know, if which of those two would you prefer? They're almost always going to say the 40 for the 100. So I don't get so wrapped up in return on investment. What I want to know is what do I need to invest to excel? And getting them to say, you know, in fundraising is probably for most organizations the single best return on investment in the whole organization. I know in hospitals they average, some of our clients average 3% return. Well, they got to invest $33 million to net $1 million, where they can maybe go out and hire 1 or 2 people and generate that for 1/4 the cost. So I'll get you that performance and maybe some language if I get some time before I get on the plane and send that to you, Jen, so you can pass it on.
That's perfect. We had a lot of people write in and say they would love it. So perfect. I wanted to get to Andrea's question. She sent it in pretty early in the presentation when you were talking about being donor-centered and really what an impact when you realized that being donor-centered was what you needed to do, what an impact that had on you. She wants to know if you ever have the situation where your focus of being donor-centered is being taken advantage of, where the donor's crossing the line of you being their friend versus being their gift advisor?
Mm-hmm. That has happened. I mean, I've had people try to include me in their will and things. I would say that I feel like they are my friends. That doesn't give me pause. What gives me pause if either one of us would be taking advantage of that relationship. You know, I feel like I'm really close to some of the best donors I've ever worked with. But, you know, I wouldn't take a gift. I don't expect them. I remember one time a guy asked me to do something. Boy, if it wasn't illegal, it was to me unethical. And we had worked together for a number of years. And I told him I just simply couldn't do that. And he said, but we're friends. And I said, you know, my integrity is worth more than any friendship. And so I think, you know, we got to be really careful with that. And it can surface in many ways. But first of all, we are represented to that organization. But that does not mean it's mutually exclusive from being a representative and a friend. But we really got to be careful with that.
Sure. Rebecca wants to know, you talked about staging concept and providing, she wants to know if you can talk a little bit more about the staging concept that you referenced and then maybe provide an example of what it might look like. Yes.
So staging, you back up, and this all goes back to capacity. Do you have a large enough staff? And then that takes some real thought. That takes some real deliberation. But you don't want to have too big a staff, but we don't see that for most organizations. We see that they're understaffed. So you got these 95% of donors who are never going to get a visit. What needs to change so we can visit some of those folks, especially the ones that have the greatest potential? Well, the staff right now is consumed. They have no time left. So we need to start thinking about what is the best way to stage adding staff. Okay, so again, that begins with a pro forma. And you set forth a strategy that if we add this person and we have these expectations, here's where we should be in 5 years. That's staging. So it becomes important which positions you fill first. It might be that you need to fill a support staff person first, and maybe it's a major gift person or an annual gift person, but you can't really do that until you've done some really good analysis of donor records. So it begins with an analysis of donors, and the way we do it, we look at it from 27 different angles. We look at lapsed donors, occasional donors, first-time donors, and then we come back and we recommend for each officer who ought to be A's, B's, and C's with their consultation. So staging is where are we going in the future based upon where we are today and what our donors are telling us. One real quick example, we worked with an organization that had 21,000 donors the year before, and their staff was only large enough to see 900. They did not make a single visit to a donor who had given less than $1,500 a year. And one organization told us recently they would never call on a donor unless they could give them $100,000 a year. And I'm sitting there going, what in the world? What? Those people are going to lose interest or die, and you have no pipeline. So staging is it's a mosaic. It's mixing different pieces together to get a full picture. Maybe I can get something to you on that as well, on staging.
I think that was great. We're close to the end, so I'm going to give you one more question from Scott. It's kind of specific, but I do think that others on the call would like to hear your insight on it. So he says that they just received a legacy gift, and they're having an internal debate about how they announce it to the community. They want to encourage new plan givers, but they don't want to come off as being flush. So he's saying don't announce the gift amount, but say that they're establishing a long-term community fund with the gift. He's wondering if you have thoughts on that.
Well, it sounds like this is I think let me answer this way. I think it's easier if you get a lot of estate gifts or plan gifts. You know, you never go to a college graduation where someone has been the John Thompson scholarship recipient and you go, well, that John Thompson was kind of arrogant. You do have to be careful that if, especially a smaller organization, that you don't look like you need, that you don't have needs because you have a lot of money. I will tell you, though, we work with everything from, you know, Vanderbilt University to Clemson to MD Anderson, St. Jude's, all these big organizations that have colleges are building these big buildings and people are still giving. You know, this is going to sound, this is a little bit biased. I confess this up front, it's a little bit biased. My finding has been that successful people want you to succeed. And I believe in donor recognition at whatever level. It does remind me of a lady I worked with years ago who said she didn't want her name on a building, and we kept trying to convince her to do it. She said, well, if you're going to do it, put lights on it so people can see it at night. You know, some people are pretty touchy, but I think I would probably, depending on the circumstances, I probably would announce the gift because I find often it inspires other people. But I'd sure do a lot of thinking about it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Eddie. We have about a minute left, and I just want to do a quick wrap up. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today, Eddie, and sharing your expertise. It was really nice to have this time for the Q&A at the end. If you didn't get your question answered, however, Eddie has offered his email address. You'll see that on the screen right there. You can reach out to him personally and ask him a question. You can also reach out to Nathan or myself if you have questions about Stelter or our products or services, or you can visit us at stelter.com. We did have a couple people ask you to go back over some points like number 2, they missed number 2, or number 5 or number 6. I decided since we are going to make the recording available and we are going to have the handouts available for you, that we would let you go ahead and do that way. So we will make those available, the recording, the handouts, and then also the pro forma that Eddie will send me. I will put that on our website at stelter.com/webinars. Look for it to be there in the next couple days. It will be there by Monday for sure. And I will also send an email out to let you know when you can access it. So look for that, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Check out our website for the rest of the 2019 curriculum and go ahead and get registered for those. And once again, Eddie, thanks so much for spending the last hour with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Nathan.
Okay, everybody have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Eddie.
Bye-bye.